Okay, thank you, Emily. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here this morning. Macro Advisory, we're a strategic advisory company operating in the Eurasia region, between Ukraine over to Mongolia. We work with different industries. We are not an engineering or a kind of mining specialist. Instead, what we cover operating conditions, economics, politics, the business environment, as it were. So that's what I'm going to look at today in summary with regard to the Kyrgyz Republic. And I will focus probably a lot on gold, even though, as we've just heard the presentation, Kyrgyz is more than just gold, and we expect, certainly in the next couple of years, and we are working with some companies who are looking at projects, particularly in rare earth and in copper in particular. But gold has been and continues to be the main kind of swing factor in terms of the economy, economic performance, and also events in the gold sector have been the key sentiment kind of factor in the last several years. So we have been talking about it a lot more. In relation to the economy, as you can see in the top right-hand graph, there is the black line is GDP, the blue line is gold price, so fairly clear volatility in the oil price has been kind of the main and is the main factor when you're looking at the performance in the economy and when we're doing our calculations. This year, up to say the first 10 months of this year with the latest data we have from the Statistics Committee, the headline GDP is up 6.1%, which is pretty good in that region. It's one of the best performing economies in the 12 states of the Eurasia region. But of course, if you, it's important to strip that down and look at the gold contribution. If you take gold out of that, then GDP is 3.2. Now that's still pretty good, and it does, as the ambassador said, we could reflect that the economy is beginning to expand. There is more going on in Kyrgyz than just mining. We see it on textiles and transportation and in other areas. So 3.2, kind of a fairly stable level, is not a bad platform. But of course, the big kind of volatile factor, swing factor, is gold. And the bottom graph there is the quarterly GDP, and you can see that kind of V-shape, the drop in last year, and that was the counter, right? So the disruption, the suspension or the kind of lower activity in the country in particular, that's what led to the dip in GDP in early 2008, and now we see as that mine kind of back to full production, GDP picking up with that contribution. That is kind of almost a temporary factor because of the base effect. So when we get into the fourth quarter GDP numbers will be lower than we've had for the last 3 quarters because the comparative base with the fourth quarter of last year is better. That was counter was already working. So if you look at World Bank or Asian Development Bank forecasts, they are looking at GDP to level off of about 4 to 5% for the next several years on that base level. So really, you know, not to labor the point, you're talking about a fairly stable situation with the volatility based on activity in the mining sector and, of course, the gold price itself. Counter is worth mentioning, I mean, referred to as the golden pillow, of course. It is worth mentioning because it has been the biggest factor. We have spent a lot of time talking about Counter and Centera in the last several years because a lot of investors who are looking at the country and who are deciding as to whether or not they should be more active in investing in Kyrgyz, they have, of course, been paying a lot of attention to what's been happening to the biggest project and that renegotiation. And there's no doubt about it, that whole process and the headlines coming out of that the dispute did lead to a suspension of activity and delayed investment. And a lot of companies we were working for simply shelved their Kyrgyz plans until this was done. And now it is. Thankfully, the deal has been agreed. The mine is now back in full operation, and everybody appears to be happy. And as you can see, the guidance for this year, 535 to 565,000 ounces of gold, and for the next year. So that has certainly led to kind of a restoration of comfort, and we are now doing kind of more analysis of the operating conditions in Kyrgyz for companies that had delayed until this was done. In terms of metals and minerals, it's not just gold, but you can see metals and minerals 60%. So again, I'm just re-emphasizing what I said in the first slide, is just the importance of the gold and particularly and metals in generally to the economy. 60% of the value of exports, precious metals, that's pretty much all gold. And you can see the UK, well, that's the gold transfer there. So again, just re-emphasizes the point, when you're looking at the macro numbers and you're looking at macro conditions in Kyrgyz Republic, it really is, you know, still predominantly dominated by gold and other metals. But it is beginning to broaden. We are seeing other areas, as I say, in transportation, logistics, consumer sectors, tourism, of course, all beginning to add some contribution as well. On the macro overview, say stable, vulnerable to mining, got vulnerable to gold in particular, gold price volatility. So thank God for the US Fed and the indecisions caused by their interaction with President Trump, certainly keeping the oil price nice and healthy for a while. The exchange rate is stable, and of course it's kind of unique in the region. You look at other countries, the SOM has been remarkably stable. The Uzbek currency is down 12% this year. The Kazakh tenge has also been relatively weak in the last couple of years, some uncertainty, but the SOM has been stable. Of course, it's partly been soft managed by the central bank, but nevertheless, it's exactly the right sort of environment you want when you're planning investments. We have seen some recent weakness. I think that we would, but very slight, but I would certainly put that into the context of what we see in the region. So as I mentioned, the Uzbeki currency is down 12%, particularly dropped 9% in August. The tenge is down a couple of percent. And in the region, we're seeing a little bit of weakness in currencies. There's a kind of a rush to be competitive. You know, the Uzbekis certainly are looking at positioning the economy competitively to attract investment, to build up exports in particular, for import substitution. So they have been more inclined to weaken the currency in order to make their domestic industry and their exports more competitive. So if you're the neighboring country, of course, you can't ignore that. So we are seeing a slight amount of weakness, but I would not see any conditions for a big devaluation in the Kyrgyz SOM or for a big kind of uncertainty or volatility in that currency. A little bit of slippage to keep in line is understandable, but really we're not looking at a different type of environment. Otherwise, you can see some macro numbers are very good relative to the neighbours. Inflation, say just over 4%, is expected to rise a little bit, which is why the policy rate is a little bit higher than that. But again, nothing dramatic when you look at the regional. Current account trade deficits, again, not a big deal for the country. The level of overall debt is very low. So really what I'm saying, again, not going to labor this, is that the economy and the financial position, the balance sheet, as you are pretty stable. There are no red flags kind of with regard to financial or economic fiscal stability in the country. I guess it is worth noting, of course, when we come to slide in DRI, 50% of foreign debt owed to China, which of course is a controversial topic in that whole region, especially as debt levels grow with regard to the transport system. Ease of business, just mention that. This again comes up a lot. Kyrgyz position has been kind of relatively stable on ease of business rankings. It's important to look at the categories. The reason why they haven't increased this year is because of a big drop in the protection of minority investors, and I think that's a legacy of Counter. So again, next year I would expect that position to be rectified, and we could see, all that's been equal, we see the country's rankings going up. So you've got to look at the specifics rather than the overall rankings. In terms of issues, and again I'm talking about a macro kind of business rather than an engineering or geological point here. I mean, public opposition to mines, this is, I suppose, a previous session, we did the discussion about ESG. Well, you know, again, it's something that particularly, of course, evident in Kyrgyz, as we know, opposition to some mines, which to some extent is environmental, to some extent is nationalistic. I guess that the Chinese-owned Sultan Sari mine that is closed down because of opposition. Again, we know the Chinese are fairly aggressive, the way they operate mines, they bring in their own people, their own equipment, don't really contribute a whole lot to the local regions. So that kind of inflames it. We see the same thing in Mongolia and other places as well. But still, environmental issues, very hot topic in the country, and of course that, I suppose, that plus obvious safety reasons led to the ban on the uranium mining, which has now been passed by Parliament and expected to be signed into law by the President. You know, and again, the history of the deal dispute, it has to be said. It's when you talk about Kyrgyz, people do bring up Kumtar, do bring up the Stans energy deal, which has now been settled, but at 20% of what they claimed. So clearly, you know, going forward, you don't want any more of these disputes or any fresh disputes. And then, you know, these issues can be kind of put into perspective in history. Again, the ambassador mentioned political instability. People do mention it. Again, my view is that it's not really a big issue in the country. It is kind of always there to some extent because of, you know, the legacy from 2005 kind of change, 2011. There's always that kind of undertone of possible conflict, but really, in practical terms, when you're in Bishkek and there's no real reason to assume that this is going to blow up into anything that should concern foreign investors, or even the kind of recent scandal on customs money laundering. Again, they grab the headlines, and you know, from our point of view, you know, again, being a different perspective than geologists, these are the sort of questions we get asked whenever there's a headline about politics, whatever. We'll get a phone call from somebody in Toronto, you know, because they're very remote, and they see the headline on CNN or they see it on somewhere else. And of course, it's blown out of proportion, and you get asked this a lot. So these are factors that we have to take into account, because they're factors that a board of directors sitting a long way off will worry about, and this is factors that stakeholders and investors worry about. So we do spend a lot of time on that, including more recently the border clashes with Tajikistan, but it doesn't affect mining. There's nothing there. Then, you know, to turn to kind of slightly more positive side, FDI, we do see a pickup in FDI this year, and it has extended in Q3. We didn't have the official data for the first half, but, you know, companies do tell us is they are satisfied with the amendments of the subsoil law. The ending and the resumption of Kumtar is a big factor that has allowed otherwise interested investors to get back on, and you can just see their sources of investment. And in the regions, again, they're all familiar to you here. And new projects, the Minister just brought some up. We know we have an interesting presentation from Chariot Gold, and that's obviously one of the big new exciting projects, so I won't say anything about that. And then, of course, just to mention, of course, in coal and copper, again, I could have long slides, but we just had them in the presentation before us. It is worth mentioning BRI. This is something that we have seen kind of having an influence in the region as the transport systems are opening up in Kazakhstan and across Central Asia and Mongolia. We are definitely also seeing more interest in projects that might have previously been considered borderline economic. Now, with the easier and more extensive transport system, and it's soon to be added to this on the left-hand side of that graph, India, Russia funding the NTSI, North-South Transport Corridor. So again, the idea will be to create a rail link from Chandipar, which technically will be linked to Mumbai, but it'll basically bring India much more into the region and connecting with BRI levels. And we're already doing one project for an Indian company that is interested in copper projects in Central Asia, and the decisive factor was they can get the product out. So again, it's having an impact and something that's worth looking at. And finally, just you know, what's next? We'll say the licenses. So we've had that. Clearly, the avoidance. I mean, I suppose it's good for our business whenever there are disputes, because we get more work and we explain it. And frankly, explain it very straightforward. But the avoidance of fresh disputes clearly is a big factor in bringing in investors. The geology is a compelling story, but the risk and the business risk is something on top of that. And then, of course, especially as neighbouring countries, in particular Uzbekistan, as we heard earlier, you know, are now in a hurry to try and also attract that same dollar, and are in the process of privatising and making licenses available. So I think it's fairly clear to everybody what needs to be done, and it looks like it's become, at least we're moving into a more interesting phase in the region, partly compelled by previous mistakes, partly compelled by the fact that others are now more active and there's more competition, but the level of interest is clearly there as well. This slide pack will be available, and I just want to highlight we have put in all of the economic data for Kyrgyz through the 3-year forecast, but also for Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Eurasia, and Uzbekistan. So they'll be available after the conference. So thank you very much.